He was shown into a bedroom on the wing of the U opposite from the one occupied by the Gali. A pleasant room warm with sunlight. A door on the far side admitted to a fig orchard. At the edge of the orchard was a storage shed with a hard earthen floor. Michelangelo took off the plank roof, letting the fig trees close it over in shade. The building backed onto a rear lane through which friends could come and visit him and materials be delivered. He could not see the house through the trees, and he was far enough away so that they could not hear his hammering. On the outside he rigged up a barrel so that he could bring water from the well and shower at night before putting on clean clothes and joining the Gali for supper in the garden. Jacopo Gali did not leave his bank at midday. No dinner was served except on Sundays and religious holidays. A servant brought Michelangelo a light meal on a tray, which he ate off his drafting board. He was grateful not to have to change clothes at midday and be sociable. He had a letter from his father acknowledging the 25 florins. The mercer had accepted Michelangelo's assurance of payment, but he wanted half of the 50 florins still owed him. Could he possibly send another 25 florins by the Saturday post? Michelangelo sighed, donned a lightweight blouse, took 25 ducats to Jacopo Gali's bank in the Piazza San Celso next to the bank of the Chigi family. Balducci was not in, so he went to Jacopo Gali's desk. Gali looked up, gave no sign of recognition, nor did Michelangelo recognize Jacopo Gali. The face was stern, cold, expressionless. He asked, in an impersonal tone, what Michelangelo desired. A credit for 25 florins to send to Florence. He put his coins on the desk. Gali spoke to a clerk nearby. The transaction was swiftly made. Gali returned his masked eyes and hard-set mouth to his papers. Michelangelo was staggered. What have I done to offend? He demanded of himself. It was dark before he could bring himself to return to the house. From his room he saw lights in the garden. He opened the door gingerly. "Ah, there you are," cried Gali. "Come have a glass of this fine Madeira." Jacopo Gali was sprawled relaxedly in his chaise. He asked whether Michelangelo had set up his shop, what more he would need. His change of manner was simply explained. Jacopo Gali apparently could not or would not establish a bridge between the halves of his life. At his bank he held him rigid, brusque. His business associates admired the way in which he dispatched their affairs and brought them the most profitable result, but did not like him as a person. They said he was not human. When he reached home, Gali shed his skin as though he were a lizard, was gay, indulgent, humorous. No word of business ever passed his lips. Here in the garden he talked art, literature, history, philosophy. The friends who dropped in each evening loved him, considered him over-generous with his family and household. For the first time since he reached Rome, Michelangelo began to meet interesting Romans. Peter Sabinus, professor of eloquence at the university, who cared little for Gali's sculptures, but who had what Gali described as an incredible number of early Christian inscriptions. The collector Giovanni Capocci, one of the first Romans to attempt disciplined excavating at the catacombs. Pomponius Laetus, one of Gali's old professors, an illegitimate son of the powerful Sanseverino family who could have dawdled in idle elegance but lived only for learning, ill-clad in buckskins and housed in a shack. I used to go to his lecture hall at midnight to get a seat. Gali told Michelangelo then we'd wait for dawn, until we saw him coming down the hill, lantern in one hand, old manuscript in the other. He was tortured by the Inquisition because our academy, like your Plato Academy in Florence, was suspected of heresy, paganism, republicanism. Gali chuckled, all perfectly true charges. Pomponius is so steeped in paganism that the sight of an antique monument can move him to tears. Michelangelo suspected that Gali, too, was steeped in paganism, for he never saw a man of the church at Gali's, with the exception of the blind brothers, Aurelius and Raphael Lippus, Augustinians from Santo Spirito in Florence who improvised Latin songs and poetic hymns on their lyres, and the French Jean Villiers de la Grosselet, Cardinal of San Dionigi, a wisp of a man in an elegantly trimmed white beard and scarlet cassock, who had begun his religious life as a Benedictine monk and, beloved by Charles VIII for his devoutness and learning, had been made a cardinal through the king's intervention. He had nothing to do with the corruption of the Borgias, living with the same devout life in Rome that he had in the Benedictine monasteries, continuing his studies of the Church Fathers, on whom he was an authority. Not all the scholars were aged. He made friends with the Jacopo Sadaletto from Ferrara, 20 years old, a fine poet and Latinist, Serafino, an idolized poet in the court of Lucrezia Borgia, who would never mention the Borgias or the Vatican when he visited at Galli's, who read his historical poems while he accompanied himself on the lute. Sinazzaro 40, but seeming 30, who mingled pagan and Christian images in his verse. The Galli made the minimum number of gestures of conformity. They went to Mass most Sundays and on the important holy days. Jacopo Galli confided that his anti-clericalism was the only gesture he could make against the corruption of the Borgias and their followers. From my reading, Michelangelo, I have been able to follow the rise, fulfillment, decay, disappearance of many religions. This is what is happening to our religion today. Christianity has had 1,500 years to prove itself and has ended in what? Borgia murders, greed, incest, perversion of every tenet of our faith. Rome is more evil today than Sodom and Gomorrah when they were destroyed by fire. Even as Savonarola has said, 100 years of Borgias and there will be nothing left here but a historic pile of stones. The Borgias can't rule for 100 years, can they? Galli's big open face was creased by furrows. Caesar Borgia has just crowned Federico as King of Naples, returned to Rome in triumph, and been consigned his brother Juan's estate by the Pope. An archbishop has been caught forging dispensations. A bishop was caught with 10,000 ducats from the sale of offices in the Curia, and so it goes. Not all the drawings he had made for the Bacchus, the Greek god of joy, seemed superficial and cynical. He had tried to project himself backward into an Elysian age, but he was playing with a myth as a child plays with toys. His present reality was Rome, the Pope, Vatican, cardinals, bishops. The city plunged deep into corruption and decadence because the hierarchy battened off it. He felt a total revulsion for this Rome, but could he sculpture from hate? Could he use his pure white marble, which he loved, to depict the evil and smell of death that were destroying what had once been the capital of the world? Was there not the danger that his marble, too, would become hateful? He could not bring himself to abandon the Greek ideal of beauty out of marble. He slept fitfully. Often he went to Galli's library, lit a lamp, and took up writing materials, as he had at Aldovrandi's after he had met Clarissa. It had been love that churned him then, made him pour out lines to cool himself off. Now it was hate, as searing an emotion, as love that caused him to pour out hundreds of lines until at dawn he had his way. Here helms and swords are made of chalices. The blood of Christ is sold to so much the quart. His cross and thorns are spears and shields, and short must be the time ere even his patience cease. Nay, let him come no more to raise the fees of this foul sacrilege beyond report. For Rome still flays and sells him at the court, where paths are closed to virtue's fair increase. God welcomes poverty, perchance with pleasure, but of that better life what hope have we, when the blessed banner leads to naught but ill? He went searching through the collections in Rome for ancient carvings. The only young Bacchus he could find was about 15 years old, dead, sober. From the way he held a bunch of grapes negligently, he seemed bored with the fact that he had conceived this strangest of fruits. His sculpture would have joy in it. Try to capture the sense of fertility of Dionysus, the nature god, the power of the intoxicating drink that enabled a man to laugh and sing and forget for a while the sorrow of his earthly miseries. And then, perhaps, at the same time he could portray the decay that came with too much forgetfulness. that he saw all around him when man surrendered his moral and spiritual values for the pleasures of the flesh. The Bacchus would be the central figure of his theme, a human being rather than a demigod. Then there would be a child of about 7, sweet-faced, lovable, nibbling from a bunch of grapes. His composition would have death in it too. The tiger, who liked wine and was loved by Bacchus with the dead skin and head conceivable. He went to the baths to look for models, thinking he might put together a composite Bacchus as he had his Hercules from hundreds of Tuscans. A throat here, a forearm there, a belly in the next place. But when, after a few weeks, he welded his features together with hard silver pen, his composite portrait was not convincing. He took himself to Leo Baglioni. I need a model, young, under 30, of a high family. A beautiful body? That once was, but is no longer, a figure that has been corrupted. By what? Wine, sensuousness, self-indulgence? Leo thought for a moment, flicking over in his mind the figures and features of the Roman youths he knew. I may know your man, the Count Ganazzo, but he's wealthy, of a noble family. What can we offer him by way of inducement? Flattery. That he is to be immortalized as the great Greek Bacchus, or Dionysus if he prefers. That might work. He's idle, and can give you his days, or what's left of them, after he awakens from his bacchanals of the night before. The Count was delighted with his new role. When he had walked through the orchard with Michelangelo, stripped off his clothes and taken the pose Michelangelo requested, he said, "You know, it's a coincidence, my being selected for this. I've always thought of myself as a kind of god." Michelangelo went to his drawing board, sucked in his breath with pleasure. If he had searched all of Italy, he could not have found a more fitting subject than Leo had selected for him. The head a bit too small for the body, the belly soft and fleshy, the buttocks too large for the torso. The upper arm a touch flaccid, the legs as straight and firmly molded as a Greek wrestler's. It was a figure desexed, the eyes unfocused from too much wine at dinner, the mouth dazedly half open. Yet the arm that held the wine cup aloft, flexed with muscular power, and all over a flawless satin smooth skin, glistened in the strong frontal sunlight that made him appear illumined from within. "You're perfect," Michelangelo cried impulsively. "Bacchus, to the very life." "Delighted. You think so?" said Count Ganazzo, without turning his head. "When Leo first proposed serving as a model, I told him not to be a bore. But this may prove to be interesting. What time can I expect you tomorrow? And don't hesitate to bring your wine with you." "That makes everything splendid. I can remain the entire afternoon without wine. The day is so dull." "You will never appear dull to me, Messer. I will see you in a new light every minute." He cast the man in 100 poses, his right leg bent sharply at the knee, toes barely touching the rough wooden base, the body slumped over on one leg, striving to stand up, the torso leaning backward, the small head thrust forward, turned one way and another, moving slightly, satiated with pleasure. And in late afternoons, when Ganazzo had drunk much wine, Michelangelo wound bunches of grapes through his hair, sketching him as though the grapes were growing there, which amused the Roman inordinately, until one afternoon he drank too much of the wine, began to sway dizzily, fell off the wood block and hit his chin on the hard earth, knocking himself out. Michelangelo revived him by throwing a bucket of water over him. Count Ganazzo shivered into his clothes, disappeared through the orchard and from Michelangelo's life. Jacopo Galli found him a lively boy of 7, with curling golden hair and large tender eyes, a delightful lad with whom Michelangelo made friends as he sketched. His only problem was to get the boy to maintain the difficult pose of holding his left arm in a contrapposto position against his chest, so that he could crush the bunch of grapes in his mouth. Next, he went into the countryside, spending a whole day drawing the legs, hoofs, and curling fur of the goats cropping the hillsides. That was how his pen finally designed his sculpture. In the center, the weak, confused, arrogant, soon-to-be-destroyed young man holding cup aloft. Behind him, the idyllic child, clear-eyed, munching his grapes, symbol of joy. Between them, tiger skin, the Bacchus, hollow within himself, flabby, reeling, already old. The satyr, eternally young and gay, symbol of man's childhood and naughty innocence. Sunday morning he invited Gali to the workshop to show him his drawing. The bowl held high in Bacchus' hand the intertwined grapes and leaves that made up his hair, the long, curving bunch of grapes that formed a structural bond between the Bacchus and the satyr, the tree trunk on which the Bacchus leaned and the satyr would be sitting, and lastly the tiger skin held in the Bacchus' falling hand, winding down through the satyr's arm, its head hanging between the satyr's open stance goat's hoofs, the hollow tiger head of a picturization of what would happen to the Bacchus' head ere long. Gali asked countless questions. Michelangelo explained that he would do some wax or clay modeling, some carving on scrap marble to test the component parts. The way the satyr's head rests against the Bacchus' arm, for instance, and the way the boy's thighs melts into the furry leg of the satyr. Exactly. Gali was fascinated. I don't know how to thank you. Michelangelo laughed a little embarrassedly. There is one way. Could you send some florins to Florence? Gali hunched his huge shoulders over Michelangelo protectively. Would you like a correspondent in Florence to deliver a few florins each month to your father? I mean regularly. Then you won't be distressed each time a packet of mail arrives. It will cost you no more that way, and we'll keep a record for you against the commission price. It isn't his fault, really. Michelangelo proffered, his pride hurt. My uncle's ill. There are some debts.